But when you draft, the son of Deion Sanders, you're not drafting primetime, you're drafting TNF.
Stop shop for news, views, and overreactions to all things NFL. We've got Jennifer Garner on the phone to be our resident capologist because it's coming up to draft day. So hey, we got Connor and we got Ronan.
Hello.
How are we getting on, Ronan? How's all down in Cork? Well, I suppose Cavan actually at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, so just up in Cavan for the bank holiday weekend. Getting my draft tape dogging out here. But yeah, seeing the family, everyone seems to be in good form, so gotta be happy about that. Looking forward to seeing where these rookies go.
Very good, yeah. All quiet up here in Dublin as well. I was down in Kerry for a bit of the weekend seeing my wife's family, and then back up. She had a 10-mile race today in Clontarf, and I had a load of gardening to get done because I'm cool and definitely not aggressively middle-aged at this point. Installed a fence today, so feeling good. Did the raised bed last week, got the fence in this week. Should be laying the seed next week. Then have to cart a ton or so of stone through the house to put down the pebble. Should be good. Well, obviously, look, we're coming into the draft. That's what this one is going to be. It's going to be our draft preview. We're going to have our mock draft as well. And that's obviously the bit you're going to want to hold on for because we have a stellar track record of picking where players are going to go. So pretty solid stuff. It is an interesting spot. We currently have all teams in possession of their own first round picks, which is something that hasn't happened in decades.
Actually never happened in the common draft era. I believe we crossed the last time, which I think was the Joe Montana trade for the Chiefs. I think 5 days before the draft involved the first round pick.
But there is some talk about maybe some of the news that's coming out at this stage being around trying to generate a bit of interest, get some of those phones ringing. We have some injury news. So New Orleans quarterback Derek Carr has a shoulder injury. They say now means that he could miss most of or all of the 2025 season. Obviously, we saw him have that kind of hand injury towards the tail end of last season and was held out for a couple of games. And his shoulder injury never showed up on any injury reports going into it. There's a lot of discussion in the back end. So obviously, look, if this is accurate, this is a problem for New Orleans, who are already in a bit of trouble, already have a lot of money tied into Derek Carr and to a roster that is in need of serious overhaul. And them not having him available would mean there's another glaring hole on that roster to fill and so on. There's a lot of talk in the back end that possibly this is a bit of a play. So I've heard two versions of this, Ronan. You can tell me which one you think it is or whether you think it's legit. So one is that this is Derek Carr wanting to get out of New Orleans. He knows that they're looking at possibly drafting a quarterback. He doesn't want to end up in kind of a Kirk Cousins-y style position. He doesn't want to be under competition for it or whatever. And because New Orleans have obviously been keeping this quiet, he's pushed this to try and make himself a problem to let them trade him out, because there are some teams that would be interesting that are still looking for quarterbacks at the moment. That's potential. The other one that I've heard that I think is more compelling is that this is coming out of New Orleans camp rather than out of the Derek Carr camp. And what they're trying to do is, they were looking at a quarterback. They pick 9th in this draft. And I think as we come to our mock drafts, we have them taking quarterbacks at that point. But maybe they look at it and they go, I'd say we'd be happy with a quarterback a little bit further down and so on. And they are trying to pump up the value of that pick and say, look, if people know that Derek Carr is injured, then people know we're going to take a quarterback. So anyone who wants to get a quarterback knows they have to come up as far as us to get there. And they're trying to add a bit of trade value to that number 9 pick. What do you think?
I'm probably more on the side that this is coming from Derek Carr's side. There's strong reports out there that the Saints asked him to take a pay cut, and he basically refused to do so. And because the Saints have made such a fuck up of their cap situation, they basically decided to extend him instead. They basically couldn't afford to cut him, even if they wanted to. A few months later, Derek Carr basically comes out and says, actually, I have a shoulder injury and, I may need to get surgery on this and that may affect my availability for the rest, for possibly all of the 2025 season. And there's strong reports out there that many members of the Saints staff basically had no idea this was coming, that New Orleans players didn't know this was coming, and it puts a very different spin on, the Saints' outlook going into this draft, where now suddenly fans are going to be, very expecting that a quarterback will be drafted, which is not a position you necessarily want to be in as a GM. I'm probably of the opinion that the relationship with Derek Carr is not going very well, that Derek Carr probably doesn't want to play for the Saints, but if they're going to give him a boatload of money because they basically snookered themselves, then he'll take it. Whenever he is let go in like a year or two, then he'll hopefully get another starting position in his opinion. So if he gets traded and they end up paying a bunch of his money, he's fine. Or if they cut him at this point and they take a bunch of cap, that's fine for him. But for him, he's just like, hold on, stick to your guns, and let them wilt in the wind, basically.
Yeah, the only risk there being that if it is kind of a cut situation, Derek Carr would be kind of he wouldn't be held in the highest of esteem. He's fine, he'd be a starter somewhere, maybe stopgap kind of guy, but I can't imagine his stock, particularly for trade stuff, is going up by saying, I'm just about, if you squint, you could just about see me being your starting quarterback, but also my shoulder doesn't work.
But he has the advantage of like Russell Wilson last year, that he'd probably basically be playing for the veteran minimum because of offsets
Yeah.
language.
We had a couple of retirements. Cornerback Patrick Peterson is retired after 13 seasons. He was an elite shutdown corner with Arizona for 10 seasons. He was a three-time All-Pro player, 36 interceptions. Was pretty much consistently on everyone's list of top cornerbacks. Also, one of the ones that people would always pick when you had to do that pick seven players who play offense and defense. He said that he does have more in the tank, but he just doesn't want to play anymore. But Patrick Peterson was top end player. I'd imagine probably Hall of Fame, maybe not first ballot. Am I thinking that about right?
I would say Hall of Fame. I think he kind of sticks in your mind as one of the, not the last, but like increasingly less common, genuine shutdown corners. These kind of gladiatorial corners whose job is to either shut down an entire side of the field or to shut down a top receiver. There are still some guys I like this, but I think increasingly other skill sets, especially value in the zone schemes, ability to tackle, have become more important. Whereas that idea of just like you've got one elite ex receiver who can bully and bully around, like say Des Bryant, and then you have one cornerback like a Patrick Peterson or Darrell Revis, and then you just kind of clash against each other for the entire game. He's kind of in that pedigree, as it were. And obviously the interception statistics aren't gaudy, but those also reflect the kind of respect he had at his peak, where quarterbacks would actively try to avoid throwing his way if they could. I don't know if he'd be a first ballot type of guy, but he'll certainly get into the Hall of Fame eventually, in my opinion.
The other guy's retired is offensive tackle Tyron Smith. So he's retired after 14 seasons. He was an elite left tackle with Dallas for loads and loads of seasons before injuries kind of knocked him down. I think he was on the Jets last year, wasn't he? And the injuries kind of meant he didn't really do much with them. Two-time All-Pro, very, very good player, but obviously just wasn't able to play the position anymore with all the injuries that have piled up. He'll definitely be Ring of Honor for the Cowboys anyway, I think.
Yeah, so I think Ring of Honor for the Cowboys, maybe a fringe Hall of Fame consideration. I think all of the injuries he had basically after his first 5 or 6 seasons will probably make that a difficult consideration. But when he did play, he was a high level elite left tackle, and obviously that's incredibly valuable in the NFL. Probably gets a bit more hype than maybe like say Teron Armstead, who also retired recently because he had the star in his helmet. But even given that, he was a great player.
We also had an extension. So Philadelphia continue their trend of extending guys a little bit early and getting them on what will then be down the line significantly cheaper contracts. So Cam Jurgens, their interior offensive lineman, he's got a 4-year, $68 million extension. Given what we've seen being given out to guards this offseason and where that market is going, this seems like good value.
So Jurgens effectively replaced Jason Kelsey last season. He played a bit at guard due to some injury stuff during the playoffs, but that's his long-term position, and obviously did a really good job there. That basically wasn't a step down from a Hall of Famer retiring like Kelsey. That's you probably can't ask for much more, and they'll be happy to get him locked in early. The Eagles have made a habit of extending guys early. Extended Jordan Mailata early a few years ago, and then they've re-extended him again a few years after that. They extended Landon Dickerson in the last year or so. Basically, they have 4 of their 5 guys on the offensive line now locked in, and that's basically the foundation on which the Saquon Barkleys and the Jalen Hurts played elite, Super Bowl winning football last year. So a very strong foundation that they have there in Cam Jurgens. I think this is just a little bit below Creed Humphrey as the highest paid center. So given where inflation will go, it will probably seem very cheap year or two.
Damn it, they keep making good moves. Stupid Eagles. Very good. Look, will we move over then and we'll have a look at some of the draft prospects coming up in this year's draft. So first up, we'll take a look at quarterbacks. Obviously, there's a lot of quarterback needy teams, and even those who have quarterbacks will often be looking to the future. The ones that kind of jump out would be Tennessee, New Orleans, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and the New York Giants. So what we'll do is we'll talk through a couple of the top guys at it, and we'll mention just a few other names you might hear. So I suppose the top guy in this draft, and the one that everyone seems to believe is going first overall, is Cam Ward coming out of Miami. The comparison he has here, Ronan, is Jordan Love. So he's kind of gunslinger with a good arm on him. He's got athleticism. He can throw with anticipation. He can read and kind of get quick releases even off platform and so on. There's some concerns that maybe his mechanics are a little bit raw. He doesn't have pocket discipline, so he can maybe hold on to the ball looking for the deep one to come open rather than take what's being given to him, which is It's a fairly common criticism of the difference between college and the NFL is that like you can get away with that a bit more in college. You're not really getting away with that in the NFL very often. One of the other hits is that maybe a lot of the defenses that he's played haven't had a huge amount of disguised like kind of swap coverages, or even that when he has, he's maybe not performed his best against them. But overall, like it seems to be a relatively consensus top 5 pick, that almost certainly a top 1 pick. He has recently been live streaming online and has maybe let it slip a bit that he's definitely going number 1 overall to the Titans. When asked about who the top wide receivers in the game are, he named 2 Titans players in his favorites. We all know that's not true, Cam, so it kind of cat's out of the bag a little bit, I'd say, Ronan, yeah?
For sure. And it's an interesting career trajectory. He's not a guy who, came into college and broke out immediately. He's a guy who really had his best season by far when he transferred from Washington State to Miami, but really had a really good year. He has those athletic and arm traits that you kind of need to be a top pick these days. I don't think you can just afford to be like a point guard, distributor guy, like an old school quarterback and expect to be picked number 1 overall. And he has enough of those traits that I think it gets teams excited. Yeah, the things that stand out and the things that are in the highlights, big improvisational plays, the Jordan Love style plays, where he shows off that he has a good arm. Not the kind of elite off the charts arm like of Josh Allen, but certainly more than good enough to get the ball into tight windows on off platform throws and avoid those kind of tight windows turning into interceptions. And while he's not a natural runner, he is an effective scrambler. It's enough athleticism to get outside the pocket and make plays when structure breaks down. And that's such an essential part of the NFL these days. Like, even if you have Shanahan on your side, there are going to be plays that break down in the NFL these days. It's basically essential that you have the ability to do some stuff outside the pocket and make things right. And I think the one nice thing that you see about him is that he plays with anticipation, which isn't that common at the college level. And with many of these other top quarterbacks, I think a lot of college quarterbacks, they have to see him open before they throw him, and that just doesn't work at the NFL. Whereas you see with Cam Ward, consistent tape of him throwing into the gap where his receiver will be. That's the kind of skill set I think that will very much benefit him. And I think it's almost a skill set that didn't get used that much in college, where there's a lot of screens and RPOs and other kind of simple concepts. I think in the NFL, if he continues to develop that anticipation play, being able to throw across the middle, then that's the kind of thing the NFL coordinators will be able to exploit much more and hopefully develop even further. So I think the things that he has there are impressive, even if it's not based on like a huge volume of tape in terms of like at his top level. It's really just his last year that you're hoping it's going to continue to build on. But there are things to concern there. But they're the kind of things that you kind of expect off these kind of, toolsy type guys coming into the NFL. And he is more refined than say like a Josh Allen was coming in, or even a Jordan Love was coming in. He has those kind of raw mechanics. Like, he definitely needs to, line up his body to throw the ball with effective velocity in all situations, rather than relying on his arm talent alone to get him through. His pocket discipline, with these guys, they tend to kind of roll back, falling backwards in the pocket. And we saw like even guys like Mahomes did that early in the career. That's something you just have to teach out of him eventually. And yeah, he does have a gunslinger playmaker attitude, that kind of Jordan Love approach where he wants a play to happen, he wants to make something happen, and that's going to get you in trouble in the NFL. So he probably just needs to learn to, give up on a play when it isn't there, basically, or take the check down or whatever like that. I think if you're concerned, or you're looking at the high level concerns, this is really more almost unfair expectations for a college guy, but obviously you're picking number overall, so you can get a bit more nitpicky. But I do think there was some games where other teams did some kind of complex disguise coverages, and that's been a big trend in the NFL the last couple of years, with the Mike Macdonald defense, for example, where they kind of don't tell you anything beforehand, they change things at the after the snap. So there was real concerns there and issues there, and where his turnovers became more prominent. So that is something he'll have to learn. But I think expecting a guy to come from college and kind of be nailed down for that these days is not really realistic. So I think given in terms of the raw tools, they're at the level where it's at least worthy of that kind of top 10 consideration in a normal draft. But in a draft like this, which is just lacking anyone who's anywhere near that kind of what we expect from a top 10 college quarterback anymore, I think he just be naturally pushed further and further up the top till where it looks like it's now inevitable the Titans will pick him at number 1 overall.
The other top name that's knocking around is Shedeur Sanders. I'd say the hype machine was in full blast, and they thought he was going to be in the contention for the number 1 overall. I think that level of hype has fallen off a little bit. So he's coming out of Colorado, a bit like Teddy Bridgewater as a pro comparison. So he is, as you were kind of denigrating there, Ronan, the point guard style quarterback. But
I'm not denigrating. I'm just saying today's NFL, that doesn't get you drafted number 1 overall. People want the Patrick Mahomes. I think there's been a little bit of a backlash because you saw failures with, say, guys like Trey Lance, where it was all tools and no experience. So I don't think we're quite where we were maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I definitely do think you can't just draft an Andy Dalton type or a Teddy Bridgewater type and expect him to go high up in the draft anymore.
No, of course. So Shedeur Sanders, I'd say his big positive would be that that he can get the ball out quick and accurately even when he's facing a lot of pressure. Basically, his offensive line in college was not great, so he's had a lot of practice with that, and he's good at it, and kind of shows at times good game management skills in it. But particularly for the son of Sanders, he's not the most athletic specimen. He doesn't have top end arm strength. He's not that quick. He's not that explosive or dynamic if he's running. Can't really make off platform throws and so on. I could see him working well in a system that lends it to kind of quick developing routes, a lot of kind of like two read go, maybe three read go kind of things. He does have a bit of a tendency to go pig play hunting, but as we've seen, I don't think he's got the arm to necessarily pull that off at the NFL level at the moment. There's also a whole added element of this. So obviously, look, there's going to be a media circus that's going to come attached to Shador when he comes to town. He's going to be big for bums on seats. That might have influenced a little bit of where we have him in our mock drafts and so on. Decent quarterback, has holes in his game, is probably higher in consideration because of who his dad is and because of the hype machine that's behind him and so on. And that's why like the Teddy Bridgewater one is interesting to me, because I think there was a bit of hype around Teddy early on, but I don't think anyone expected him to be the top talent. But he's still carved out a decent career out of it. But I think, yeah, things have cooled on Shador Sanders a little bit. He's still going to go in the first round, though, I would imagine.
I think that's still likely, though. I think increasingly people are saying second round, but I think we're in kind of a lie season, so we'll see where it comes. And I think there's enough teams that are desperate to get a quarterback. Someone will plump for the Sanders thing. And as you say, you're not really just drafting Shador Sanders, just random quarterback from Colorado. You're drafting the son of Deion Sanders, one of the most flamboyant personalities in NFL history. And, obviously Shador Sanders followed his father during his college career, starting with Jackson State, and then transferred to Colorado when Deion went to Colorado and kind of remade that program. And they had a pretty good second year after a first year that started well and then kind of fizzled out. Like, the problem is, as you say, you're drafting the Sanders brand. It'd be possible to escape that, but what you're drafting in terms of what you're going to see on the field is a, effective quarterback, at least when he's playing well, who gets the ball out, who does what's needed. He plays like a player who's been coached by like a professional player his entire career, who's been coached very well, who understands how to play the game of football from the quarterback position at a high level. But you're not seeing someone who's a game breaker, right? You're seeing a Teddy Bridgewater, an Andy Dalton, a guy who can certainly get you to where you need to if you build the right tools around him, but not someone who's going to drag you there. He's kind of the trailer, not the truck, right, of a team. I think what you see is that guy who, even though he played, as you said, behind a really bad offensive line, he continued to stick tough there. He took a lot of hits, and obviously you'd hope with the NFL level he won't have to deal with that, but he saw that he could play through that, and he was able to, get the ball accurately out there and was willing to maximize the value of his big game threat, Travis Hunter. And so I think what you see here is a guy who has the potential to be like a nice safe floor to bring in, but then it's just that ceiling, right? It's like he did a lot of stuff in college where he escaped out of the pocket or ran in the pocket, where you just go in the NFL, he'd probably be caught behind the line and turned out into a big loss. He lacks the elite arm to make up for what are still kind of somewhat questionable mechanics. He doesn't really set his feet well and kind of throw the ball with velocity unless he has a bit of a clean pocket to work with. And I think you did see him, because of how bad his offensive line, get jittery, kind of move around a lot, especially last year, and try to make things happen. And that makes sense because you have Travis Hunter and it kind of works out more often than it does there. But the NFL, that's the kind of stuff which will probably end up getting into a lot of trouble there with these kind of deep drops and kind of, making your offensive lineman's job more difficult. So I think the things that you see there, someone who could be a very effective game manager is on the tape, but you do also see him because of the bad situation he was in. And in, to be honest, what was a fairly simple offense. He had like very high accuracy, I think around 70% or so, but a lot of that was built on the screens and the RPOs and the very simple, quick passes that NFL defenses are going to eat up all day if you don't get them to respect you with the deep balls or kind of with the more complex schemes that you'll be required to execute at the NFL level. But, I think Shador Sanders, if you need a brand that will kind of save your job, for lack of a better term, and someone who can at least kind of execute what the coach wants him to execute on a fairly consistent basis, then I think he can do both those things for you. But when you draft, the son of Deion Sanders, you're not drafting primetime, you're drafting TNF.
Yeah. Other names that you might hear: Jackson Dart out of Mississippi, so kind of a Brock Purdy type spread quarterback, goes through with anticipation, but it's kind of coming out of a run pass option heavy kind of gimmicky college scheme, so we'll have to see whether it would work in the NFL. Jalen Milroe out of Alabama, who's a Justin Fields type dual threat, who's got really, really high athleticism and like a super sonic arm. It's just that kind of like Can he read the defense? Can he throw with anticipation? Will he be able to be accurate and all that kind of stuff? And Tyler Show, who is a name who I've only kind of been reading into the last week or two, as I've been hearing a lot of stuff about him moving up draft boards, but kind of like very prototypical old-fashioned style quarterback. Josh McCown is the comparison you picked for him there. He's a bit older, 26 years old. Was injured in college a bit. He missed 3 seasons. But he's kept clean, kind of works as a old school classic quarterback, but then when he gets pressure, he doesn't make good decisions. You have to land in the right location for that.
I think Jackson Dart is probably the only one who's getting a bit more hype. He's kind of a guy who, as you said, kind of played in a kind of gimmicky scheme, but did show enough flashes of anticipation that guys go, okay, maybe he has like a pro level skill set. He said like a Brock Purdy type. He was willing to hit the shot into the hole that, you know, maybe some guys aren't willing to, but like he doesn't have any kind of super fancy traits that kind of make you go, okay, this guy's like worthy of a first round pick. Poorest in his kind of contract scenarios, which is very concerning. Like it's fine being good when you're ahead, but like when you're behind and putting up bad tape, that's not what you want to see. Milrow is for me probably the most intriguing of these kind of other options. Like he just has freaky athleticism. Like we're talking like Lamar Jackson, maybe even more athletic than Lamar Jackson. And while everything else about him is like really questionable as a quarterback in terms of decision making and mechanics and anticipation, that's all pretty much like raw and needs to be worked on from the ground up. Like I think he's just one guy that got something in his pocket that is elite. That is something that you can, you know, a superpower that you can build the rest around with if he's given time or given the right scheme. But at least he has something that makes you go, okay, this guy, I could see the potential of this guy becoming truly elite. Whereas the rest of these guys, and Tyler Shook's probably the best of the rest, you know, that's a quarterback you can set your watch to. There's still enough old school scouts who are like, I want a quarterback who'll just execute my scheme and like, you know, like is tall and just throws the ball well. And Tyler Shook looks like that, but he's got an injury history. He's very old.
Yeah. Next up, we'll look at some of the skill position players. So running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, fullbacks, and so on. Obviously, everyone wants some more guys here, but teams in particular need, we'd say Vegas, Dallas, Chicago, Denver, Chargers. I think top of the list is Jeanty. Jeanty, I think, is the most intriguing one. He's a real top-end running back. It's going to be an intriguing one to see whether or not what we saw out of free agency last year is going to impact what happens in the draft this year. So last year, obviously, we saw the likes of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley move to teams and really kind of make huge developments to those teams' offenses. They were able to base large chunks around them and kind of re-show the value of a high-end running back. We talked about there's not a lot of high-end guys in the free agency this year, and Ashton Jeanty is like a proper top-end running back. The comp is kind of Morris Jones-Drew in this, so he's incredible contact balance. He is able to just power through tackles. Like, it's very, very hard to bring this guy down. He's got a real thick body, so people bounce off him. He's able to move side to side to kind of get out of the way and stuff. Just really, really exciting to watch. Decisive runner, like high-end athleticism and great vision, so he kind of knows where he's going. Now, he maybe lacks the top end speed, but he still has very good speed in this one. I think the only real knock on him is that he wasn't used a huge amount in Boise State in pass catching. What you want from a top running back is you want them to be able to stay on the field in third down, do pass protection, and do a bit of pass catching and provide another option on it. It's a good running class draft overall. There's guys who will be good in the third and fourth rounds in this thing, but like this guy seems to be the real deal, Ronan.
This is a really good running back class. We're not going to get the time to talk about the rest of them, like guys like Marion Hampton and Trayvon Henderson and many beyond that. But this guy is just so good that he's kind of sucked the oxygen out of the room in terms of like this guy, even in a great running back class, is obviously the generational prospect here. And I think, as you say, the thing that stands out about him is that generational contact balance. And I think the fact that he has different types of contact balances. Sometimes tacklers go straight at him and they bounce off him like a ping pong ball away. Sometimes he just slips through them. Sometimes have an arm around him, they just like fall off him. And it's almost like the kind of best parts of getting a Maurice Jones-Drew, who's kind of like bowling ball type running back the guys could get, or like the Marshawn Lynch where he just has legs keep churning and they just couldn't get him down, or even an Alvin Kamara who's just so slippery and can get through holes that don't seem to exist there. He seems to have all those different styles of running which make it nearly impossible to tackle him. He's a little bit small, if that's criticism, but I think we've seen running backs succeed being small. I think it's almost a benefit because he's so dense and small. There's so little surface area for like defenders to get their arms around. But you see on the tape again and again, it's just guys falling off him, bouncing off him, and this guy just, you know, in an NFL where increasingly offensive schemers are getting running backs one-on-one with defensive backs and stuff like that, this just feels like a guy where, you know, if he breaks one tackle or two tackles, that's going to turn into a home run hit. Now, ideally, he'd go to a team that maybe already has good infrastructure there and that they could take him to the next level, a bit like you say, the Saquon Barkley did for the Eagles. But this guy's so good, and obviously, as I said, not the best draft class, that even though running back value is a bit lower. I think this guy is going to go high because people, blue chips talents like this don't slip very far very often. We talk about the ability to kind of win in all these different situations, have guys like basically lose against him so often, and then he combines that with all the things you want to see from a high level running back. He hits the hole decisively, good enough speed by far, and he sees the vision. He has the vision to kind of sort through the mess in the first and second levels. He wasn't used much in the pass game, but when he was using the pass game, he definitely showed enough there that he could definitely be a weapon. He'll probably just need to refine his routes if he wants to take that next level and become like a CMC type god player. But he doesn't need to have that to be an elite player in the NFL by any stretch. I think the only other thing people are concerned about is he did play a lot of football at the college level, so you'd maybe be a little bit concerned about wear and tear, but maybe a little bit similar to Derrick Henry, because other defenders seem to be more punished by tackling him than he is. You'd probably hope that like he is going to survive and kind of continue to dominate at the next level. He did play for a small school, Boise State, and increasingly in the college level because of the transfers portal and all that kind of stuff. It's rare for guys to stay with the smaller teams, but when he got to the more elite aspects in the college playoffs and stuff like that, he continued to dominate. He continued to look like he belonged there. So just because he's a running back, he probably won't go number one overall in the NFL these days. Someone's going to take him high because, rather than taking a risk on, like, say, a raw edge rusher, even though there's more value in that position, this guy is the sure thing. Take him.
Next up, we'll look at a tight end, Tyler Warren out of Penn State. So the comp here is fairly directly Taysom Hill, because this guy was kind of everything for that Penn State offense, right? He caught passes, he was a running back, he was a wildcat quarterback for them, plays really tough, is good at going up and getting contested balls. Just kind of like the, yeah, coach, put me in, I'll do whatever you want kind of approach, and kind of has the physical attributes to do that. Maybe he doesn't have the top end speed, but given you can move this guy around the formation a lot and you can do a lot of really interesting things with him, I think that's something that you would accept as a trade-off. And then also, he's a willing blocker, you would say. It makes me think a bit of like George Kittle liking blocking kind of thing. The only difference would be maybe he hasn't done as much inline blocking, because obviously he was just being used more as an offensive weapon. If you're looking for a tight end, this is, again, it's a good draft for tight ends. There's him, there's Loveland, there's Taylor and Arroyo, and plenty more. Like, this will be a good one for tight ends, more so than we'll talk about wide receivers in a minute. But Tyler Warren definitely seems to be kind of the top one of them.
If you look at his ceiling, he has a ceiling to become like a George Kittle type guy, a guy who can block. He has the build to get into that, and he did get better as a blocker in the last year of his career. But basically, the reason he's going as such a highly drafted prospect is because he was such a weapon for Penn State. He was kind of the centerpiece of that Penn State offense, which had a lot of drawbacks, including a quarterback, and he just ended up being the guy that they went, all right, let's scheme this guy open, let's make this guy work, have him do wildcat, have him like go against man coverage like deep, let's have him go be a runner. And as I said, like, comparing him to Taysom Hill makes sense, but he's a much higher ceiling than Taysom Hill in terms of being able to do more of the kind of traditional tight end type stuff, because he obviously has that skill set to begin with. But that kind of do it all type guy is kind of what you want to see from this guy, because I think, there's definitely a world where he gets drafted by like a boring team and they just try to make him into like a George Kittle. If he really works out, that could still happen. He could still be a great player, but I want to see him to go to like a very innovative offensive mind. Ben Johnson with the Bears, for example, stands out, and let's see what this guy can do. Let's make it fun. Let's do the kind of Taysom Hill magic bullshit. I think when you see in terms of just his pure tight end stuff, this guy loves contact. He's a willing blocker. If his technique is still raw, he needs to work on that, but he has the build to be a good blocker. But he's also more than happy to get stuck in the middle of it. Lots of catches in tight man coverage where he took huge hits and he just bounced right off them, was happy to take that stuff. So he has that kind of George Kittle energy where he's just going to get up and go again and kind of get into the action, and he's got that like leadership potential where this guy could really be the kind of spark plug of your offense, not just in terms of his production, but also someone who kind of reignites and makes everyone excited to play football with the team. So for me, I think the big thing you want to see is that despite he has limitations, he's not the supreme athlete of, say, like a Gronkowski, so I don't know if he has that type of upside, but in terms of like, if you build things around early in his career, making Tyler Warren work, if you build plays and stuff that maximize his talent like Penn State did, I think you get lots of production early on, and then you can hopefully develop those kind of core old school tight end skills, and then he has that kind of George Kittle upside that could be really interesting. So yeah, I think Taysom Hill initially become George Kittle is the ideal pathway, but I think that needs a offensive mind who can get the most of him early on, so he gets that hype, gets that confidence, and that guys can build the offense around him.
And then, as I said, we'll look at wide receivers. So there's a lot of decent, but maybe not a ton of like top end wide receiver ones in this draft. Terracotta McMillan out of Arizona is probably the closest that you're getting at the moment. So kind of he's a lean WR1 with high level route running, kind of is able to beat most types of coverage, pretty good against press and so on, good after the catch with the ability to kind of like get up and get the ball if he's scrapping for it. I think he's maybe, again, I hate to come back to this, but he's not as fast as maybe you'd want out of a proper true WR1, but as long as he keeps developing his contested catch stuff and his routes, and he should be able to beat coverage or at least be able to get the ball against it. You're going to probably want to pair him with a slightly more experienced quarterback to get the most out of that, because they'll need to trust that they can throw it into coverage to him and so on. There's some question about maybe his motivation stuff as well, that he was taking some plays off or whatever, but a lot of really good B students is what I would call his wide receiver class. This guy is maybe the only one who has the potential for a proper if he continues to develop, but he needs to show a bit of development from where he is currently. You've got him comped to Cortland Sutton here.
Yeah, so I don't think he's a guy you want ideally to be like your kind of Jamar Chase, destroyer of world type or old school, like, dominant wide receiver one. But he is kind of very much good suit to being kind of your wide receiver 1A. And kind of, I think, guys like Cortland Sutton for Denver, who's been very successful for them for many years, guys like Michael Pittman for Indianapolis, people like Michael Thomas for the Saints back in the day, someone who can move anywhere across the line, and it's almost at its best as kind of the safety blanket of your offense. He has efficient route running, he understands how to beat press when he needs to, he's effective at finding the zones across the middle when he's played from the slot. So I think, from my perspective, he's not someone who is the most exciting centerpiece of your offense, but is kind of someone you can kind of, it's almost like the best cog for all the other wheels to turn around, and someone who is very effective at getting open and running very clean routes and routes that have some of the more complex aspects that many receivers don't come into the college with, where he sets defensive backs up and kind of gets them into the area he wants to, and then kind of gets wide open by college standards, wide open. To be fair, he had a lot of wide open like snaps which basically were missed because the quarterback was absolutely shite for Arizona, but this is a guy who can be that guy, and I think you'd say that a lot with his yak ability, as I said, kind of similar to Michael Pittman, where once you get the ball into his hands because of the separation he gets, he's also then in a good position to then turn that into more yards running the ball, kind of getting a bit further down. He's a languid and a bit of a linear type runner, but he's very effective at that, and it's almost like a little bit misleading because it doesn't look as fast as it actually is. And I think he refused to do the 40 time when people are kind of saying 4 or 5, which is slow for an elite wide receiver. So he's certainly not going to turn into like your Jamar Chase probably, but this is certainly someone that you can build a very good offense around. I think the questions about his attitude, there are a little bit of concerns there. Like, does this guy have the attitude to become like a truly like generational wide receiver? When he's like asked, do you study like tape while you're off, and he basically says no, and he just studies what he's when he's working, and he studies the tape that his coaches give him, and he does a very good job of that. But is he like taking the extra steps to become the the next elite wide receiver? Possibly not. And then you see certain routes where he's not the designated play, he basically takes off where he's never going to get the ball. But like, to be fair, I believe he was like basically like 40% or something of the targets for this offense. So if you're being used that much, then like I don't necessarily blame you for taking some plays off when you basically have to take so much of the burden of making this ball move forward all the time. I think the one thing you probably would like to see, given how tall he is that he'd be a better contested catch receiver. He is a good contested catch receiver, but you see enough cases where, despite his physical advantage, that more feisty defensive backs were able to get on the ball and turn what could be a catch into a drop in those situations. But I think he's everything there. I think Cortland Sutton, Michael Pittman, not those guys that get you really excited and you want to draft first in your fantasy draft, but someone that you can feed the ball to 100 times in a season and then ends up with like 1,200, 1,300 yards and is really good at moving the chains. That's kind of where I can see him doing it. I think that's a very valuable role, and a role worthy of being wide receiver 1 type prospect in the NFL, in my opinion.
Yeah. A few other names you might hear be Colson Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan, Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. Marion Hampton is the only other running back, maybe Henderson, that could sneak into the first round, but I imagine there'll be more second round. Akuba, Burden, Major, Arroyo. So yeah, and like I said, we'll talk about Travis Hunter in the cornerback section. We'll move to the offensive line, Ronan. We won't spend a ton of time on this because obviously line stuff is very hard to talk about in abstract. It's just literally tape dog to understand it. Top prospect here is Will Campbell out of LSU, tackle or guard. Looks a bit like Ryan Ramczyk, Zach Martin is what you've kind of given him as a comp here. So kind of like a proven offensive lineman, played against kind of top defensive lines in college and did a good job. He's smooth, he moves his feet, his hand technique is good, has athleticism, has toughness. Now, depending on how old school your coach is, there are coaches out there who like to draft purely on length of arm. I'm not going to be very happy to say that. Our coach is one who, when drafting tackles, only has a very specific arm length that he does not seem to draft anyone below, which is unfortunate. And this guy has shorter arms, maybe has a little bit of limited side to side quickness, so that can mean he can get caught on edges, he can maybe be caught off foot and kind of in a lungy type position and so on. So he'll need to work on that a little bit more. Playing tackle for the most part at the moment, might play guard at the professional level depending on need, but like this guy should be a relatively quick plug and play in. He'll need to obviously get into it, but this is true of every offensive lineman pretty much, is they're going to need to get into a strength and conditioning program in the NFL because there is a big step up there. And so I meant to mention as well, teams who'll be looking in these in particular will be Seattle, Kansas City, the Jets, Miami, New England, and Houston.
Yeah, I think the thing with Will Campbell is that he has proven tape against the best kind of what college can offer on the edge. So, he certainly feels like he could be a good tackle. But the question then is that because of his physical limitations and because he perhaps lacks that lateral quickness to kind of get those quick steps out, that when you're playing like the best of the best, which you are in the NFL every week, that those kind of bad snaps get exposed more and more often, and he just turns into being like a good but not great or an average type tackle, and which is worth a lot. Like there's guys that get paid
average tackle is worth a lot of money.
So he might be incentivized to stick at tackler to kind of push his way to be tackle, even if that's not his best position. But I think a lot of people see him and go, okay, Zach Martin, that's a guy who was a tackle in college, moved to be a guard and turned into a all-pro Hall of Fame type guard. And some people go, well, if that's your kind of baseline, that he become like an all-pro type guard, that's pretty good, right, to draft. So it just comes to that question, like, are teams willing to draft as highly as this guy's been touted, which is kind of top 10 potentially, for a guy who might just end up being like a very good guard for you. I think that's really where the big question comes in, because basically, he played against the best defensive linemen in the college level, and he always came out looking good. He plays with good technique, he's got good feet, he's got good hands, and he's got the toughness and athleticism that you need to believe that this could be a really good offensive lineman. And as I said, like, he just, when he loses, he can be a bit panicky about that, and that's why if you move him inside, that situation where you like lose and you lunge a bit and you end up basically out of sorts and out of balance, that isn't likely to happen because obviously the play is so much closer to you, and that's why people probably see him more as an elite guard prospect. But you gotta see different opinions. Like some guys are like, say, like Bernard Ryman for Indianapolis, or Ryan Ramczyk for the Saints, though he just recently retired, but played very well before his major injury. Like, these guys have done okay and have been good solid players, but I think just some people see that Zach Martin potential and go, okay, let's get this guy in. And I think it's unfortunate that this year, if you're looking for like a genuine like left tackle type guy, there aren't a huge amount of guys. Like the next guys on this list, like Armand Membu, he's a solid do everything offensive lineman. Like, he's quite inexperienced, but already shows very pro level traits in terms of both his technique and his approach to the game of football. But he can panic a little bit, and he has the same lack of size. He not the arms here, just the general lack of size. So unless he bulks up a bit, and then you wonder what effect that might have on its athleticism. Is this a guy who should be moved inside? That's the same story with Calvin Banks again, who's like compared to like Dion Dawkins, and this is like a guy who's ready day one, especially as a run blocker, to go there, and he has good athleticism and good technique, and he's good tenacity. All these guys they all look like good, ready to go offensive linemen, but they just don't look like the dancing bear or the like big long armed like left tackle where you don't have to worry about like a long armed defensive end getting into their pads and pushing them off. As you say, some coaches look at that and they go, look, if the defender gets into your pads first, you lose, and that's just the way the NFL is, and you just have to deal with that. And that these guys just don't have the levers to stop that. If they got T-Rex arms in relative terms, these guys' arms probably are nearly like a third or longer than ours, to be honest, at least. But like they're just not going to be quite there. So I think it's interesting there, and I think they're not perfect, but these guys like Will Campbell is ready to go day one. These other guys are very close to that. So the only guy who's probably like has the upside to be a genuine like tackle is Josh Simmons, who's very athletic. He has that.
Shut up, Ronan. Stop telling people about him.
Coming off a major injury, so he could fall. Obviously, Chiefs fans are perhaps hoping for that, and he does have still. He's probably rawer than say Will Campbell is in terms of his technique and his ability, but he looks like a tackle, and that's rare in this class. So you could definitely see a Josh Simmons go there, even a Josh Connerly, who's not as quite freakish as Josh Simmons, but is more of a traditional tackle type guy. I think the only other guy worth pointing out is Gray Zabel, who's this guy, kind of almost the quintessential modern offensive lineman, where he's played all across the line. And you see like lines like Green Bay, where they have a bunch of these guys. Probably a lot of people are putting him in the center, even though he played mostly tackle at North Dakota State. Compared to Ali Marpet there. But he's a guy who could just put in there and be a really good job, probably in the interior defensive line, because his skill set probably suits that better with the short arms, and some of most of the big struggles came on the outside. But yeah, also a big character guy. So I think as Seahawks fans, he's been associated a lot with us. But yeah, I think if you're looking for an interior offensive line, you have really, really great options. If you're looking for a tackle, you either have to take a risk on a guy who maybe doesn't have the fundamentals to be a great tackle and might have to move inside later, or take the risk on Josh Simmons coming off a major injury.
Yeah, let's move over to the defensive side. Let's go first level. So that's going to be your edge rushers, your D tackles, your DN. Teams looking in particular in this area be Cincinnati, Arizona, Carolina, Detroit, Washington, and Philly. There's one particularly like kind of top end talent who's definitely going first round, and maybe another one who's pretty much certain to be first round. These are the types of position that you'll see multiples in the first round, but there's two kind of top guys that we'll talk about. So first up, Abdul, edge rusher from Penn State. You commented to Von Miller here, so he's kind of an elite finesse edge rusher. So he's very, very quick. He's got the bend to kind of get outside and get around an offensive tackle. He has counter moves that he's used at the college level whenever the tackle kind of comes around outside and tries to block them out. Probably needs to get a little bit more weight and muscle onto him as well at the NFL level. He's a little bit small for it and kind of doesn't have a bull rush as such at the moment. But yeah, like kind of everything else is kind of developing. And this is a guy who hasn't played edge rusher for his entire career either. He was playing linebacker for a bit beforehand. So there's still growth in his game, but he's shown enough quality that this guy is, I think, fair to say, probably a relatively consensus top 3, top 5 pick.
I think there's a little bit concerned about his foot injury, but he's been cleared by doctors, so apparently, according to his agent, you shouldn't worry about it, but maybe we'll see. If he falls, they probably don't trust the doctor that he paid to tell him he's fine. But like this guy, like in terms of the narrative, linebacker convert who played for Penn State, that's basically the exact same story as Micah Parsons, and obviously everyone wants to have the next Micah Parsons, but he doesn't quite fit in terms of his tape into looking like a Micah Parsons. Like Micah Parsons was like a freight train, like, you know, he played mostly from the linebacker position even in his final year before becoming more of a edge rusher in the NFL, but he's a freight train. He's like really strong and he plays strong, whereas Abdul Carter feels like a finesse edge rusher, maybe closer to the Latu Latu kind of guy that you had last year in the draft. And you know, he has that elite quickness, he has that elite bend. Like this guy bends down so low and guys just can't get their hands on him, and tackles at the college level just consistently just didn't know what to do with this guy. And when they just like completely sold out to kind of take away the outside rush, which is basically a speciality, like he had enough in terms of like spin moves and counter moves to get inside and get the sacks when he needed. But I think when you get to the next level, that lack of core strength that he's shown up to this point, and it's a convert, and he's a bit smaller, but I think you could definitely get him in the training room and get him up there with someone who plays as hard as he does. Then he'll need to add that, because if he can't bull rush, I do think like elite tackles at the NFL level are going to eat this guy up more than you would expect for a guy who's expected to go like top 3, top 5. And so I think it's a hard way to live being a purely finesse rusher. You can do it, like you see a guy like Von Miller who's the player comp here do that their entire career if you're really, really good enough, but it's hard living. So I think if this guy could just build a little bit more strength, but if this guy could just build enough core strength to have a good bull rush move, doesn't need to be elite, just good enough that tackles have to respect it, then the things that he has and the things that he has are so good, are genuinely NFL elite, then he can then turn that into production on a very consistent basis on the NFL. Otherwise, I'd worry that for a guy being so high, he might put up like 3 or 4 like sacks against like a backup tackle on a given week and have good numbers at the end. But in terms of being the guy who makes key plays against the best of the best in the NFL, he needs to build a little bit more to get there. But as I say, he's only had 1 year as an edge rusher after being a linebacker earlier in his career, and he obviously got this far and got a lot of production very quickly. There's obviously a lot of room there to continue to grow, and I think that because he has a thing in his locker which is already elite, and he has so much more room to grow, both physically and in terms of his development as an edge rusher, in terms of adding more pass rush moves, I think he's worthy of being a very highly touted edge rusher prospect. But perhaps he probably reflects to a certain extent the weakness of the draft, where that's enough to get you in like top 3 consideration rather than say like top 10, top 16.
Yeah, and kind of more interior side of things, Mason Graham is the name there coming out of Michigan. So you comped him to Christian Wilkins here. So he's kind of a three tech with kind of first step suddenness. He's able to blow up plays pretty consistently, has a high motor, kind of powers through to the end of plays, really kind of follows through on everything he's doing as long as it stays in front of him, I think, because he's short body and short arm, so he can get a little bit washed out. I always find it weird talking about arm length in these things because it's incredibly important, but it just sounds weird to anyone who's not doesn't really know why
The
it's
first
relevant.
the first hit matters, and the longer your arm is, the more likely you are to get the hit.
Yeah.
You're controlling the play rather than the offensive lineman versus
He might struggle against elite interior pass rush because he's going to be playing on the inside. He might struggle with that because of the fact that he is a little bit short armed, he's a little bit short bodied, which means like I said, not dissimilar to the discussion with the running back. It's why he's able to pack such a punch and why he can be so good in run blocking stuff. But yeah, might struggle against some of the more top end talent in this. He's still going to go in the first round. He's still got bags of potential, but that would be kind of the knock on him.
Yeah, and I think like him and Carter have that problem where I think in the tape people say they end up on the RAS far more than you would expect from what you're now, let's say, top 10 type prospect build of these guys. And Mason Graham's side, it's basically just a problem. Like I'd say he's short and he has small arms and he's really reliant on his like special move, which is basically how sudden he is and how quickly he can blow a play up. Like if he wins in like the first second or two, he gets a TFL. He gets he doesn't get sacked as much as he should, but he gets a disruption and causes a play to be blown up before it can get started. And like that's the kind of thing that when it works, it's really flashy and it gets scouts very excited, and it kind of makes you think a little bit of Aaron Donald, the way that he could blow up plays almost instinctually. But that's as I said, similar to relying on finesse moves or outside moves to win in the NFL. That's a hard way to live. Like there's only been a handful of guys who in the interior can win like that so quickly that they can get away without perhaps having the full skill set. And in the case of Aaron Donald, he built the rest of the skill set anyway, so it didn't really matter. So he'll need to have like the 8-pack or whatever to work. Probably Mason Graham if he wants to get to the Aaron Donald level, but he has that that elite tool, that thing that gets people salivating, and when he blows up a play, it works really well. This isn't to say that if he doesn't get immediately there, he's just going to give up. He does have a high motor, he keeps working, but because of his physical limitations, there's just too many times where because he's a good player and he obviously was the focus of the opposing offensive lineman, if he get double teamed, he could just get washed out of the play or end up on his ass, and that's just not something you ever want to see, especially in an NFL where defenses have become much more about plugging gaps rather than piercing gaps in the interior, and you just worry that this might be a guy who might end up being more of a situational interior pass rusher than a guy you're playing on 3 downs. And when you're going to spend a top 10 pick, is that something worthy of that value? Some people would say yes, because of the value of disruption is so high in the NFL, but some people might say, am I really playing this for a guy who's going to play 50% of snaps? I really want more from a guy I'm drafting this high. And I think he'll also need to, if he wants to become that elite pass rusher from the interior, he still has fairly raw pass rush moves. He'll probably need to go in with the edge rushers and like learn how to do the hand moves and stuff like that, and the counters, if he wants to genuinely become a really frightening interior pass rusher. But right now he just has that kind of first step suddenness that gets guys frightened and can cause a play to be got done immediately, and that is something that is valuable. But whether it's as valuable as a top 10 pick or a top 5 pick, I'd say maybe in other drafts maybe not, but in this draft maybe perhaps it will be. So he will be drafted in the first round and probably in the top 16 at the very worst, but you maybe a little bit more, not going quite as much as you'd expect in terms of like a do-it-all tackle who's could be the next Aaron Donald for that than you might expect. And I think that's kind of true for the rest of this class. Like in terms of the edge rushers, there's basically like kind of two extremes. There's like guys who are productive in college but don't have like an elite athletic traits, so they're very solid and good technicians, but they're not going to wow you in terms of what they look. And then you have the exact opposite, these guys who are like Adonis type edge rushers, like prototypical chiseled, these are kind of words you see in their scouting reports, but who had very little production, who just need to work on their stuff. So maybe more on the Jadavian Clowney end of things. So Michael Williams and Shamar Stewart are probably the two big ones who have that kind of more physical first approach. They look the part, they look like he walks off the bus and he goes, that guy, that's a defensive end who's going to destroy people. And then on the other hand, you have guys like Mike Green or Donovan Ezekuru who are like really great technicians, kind of like Alex Highsmith type players who could be very productive because they understand the game and the hand moves and the technique, and they have enough bend to kind of get around when they need to. But it's a little bit, they're not they don't blow you away just by the way they look, right? And then similarly, the interior defensive line is actually alongside running back probably one of the stronger positions. There's lots of guys here. We've only talked about Mason Graham in terms of top of the rounds, but you have a lot of guys who will probably go in the first round, second round, third round, and so hard who will definitely be immediate contributors to the guys. You have like Kenneth Grant, who's a very good all round, very high effort, kind of could fit in well with say a Lions or Baltimore Ravens type team, and then you have big nose tackle type guys like Derek Harmon, which I think is very valuable in the current NFL. And then Walter Nolan's a guy who has very limited snaps, but his snaps are very, very explosive. So if you're willing to take the more high risk approach to things, then Walter Nolan, I think I have heard reports he is moving up draft boards very quickly because they say this is a draft where, because it's lacking the elite high end talent, guys who have those special moves, who have that kind of special sauce, might go a little bit higher than you might expect despite the limited production in college. So it's a very good interior defensive lineman throughout the entire draft, but similar to running back, maybe not as many headliners, but you should find starters there consistently throughout the draft this year.
Yeah, second level of the defense, linebacker, strong safety kind of stuff. Tampa Bay, Rams, Colts, Falcons, and Bills will all be looking in this area. There's kind of one standout in this that we'll talk about is Jalen Walker, kind of an edge slash linebacker out of Georgia. Your comp to him was Kyle Van Noy, so he's kind of in between linebacker and edge rusher. So he kind of uses high end burst for his pass rush moves off the edge, and then blitzes a lot as linebacker, and it just flings himself into the run game. Works well as a QB spy, has the speed and the vision to be able to track around that. He was a big leader in that Georgia locker room, but obviously will need to work on particularly some of his coverage stuff at linebacker if he wants to make it at the next level. He's maybe not the size or athleticism that you'd want in a traditional edge rusher, and maybe doesn't have the instincts you would want in your traditional linebacker. So it is that kind of weird one of kind of sits in between two positions, not really master of either of them, but does, as you said, Ronan, have that thing where what he does add is an explosive difference making element to it, that he'll dive in the run game. He could throw people off on whether he's going into coverage or he's coming on a blitz or whatever. I think there'd be a lot of defensive minded head coaches who'd be looking at him and saying, man, I could have an awful lot of fun hiding what I'm doing if that guy was on the field for me.
And that's been the trend in the NFL defensive landscape the last few years, these disguised defenses kind of emerging from Baltimore and stuff like that. And so it's the perfect time to be a tweener, or maybe tweeners don't exist anymore, because now everyone has to be able to do almost everything quite effectively, so that those disguises can be, legitimate, and that they won't be bluffed effectively. And I think Jalen Walker is coming in as a guy who, as you said, not an elite pass rusher, not an elite linebacker. I think a lot of people talking about being maybe an outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme, who's almost better being a coverage guy, as well as going forward. And that's a really valuable skill set to have. You see a guy like Kyle Van Noy, who obviously for most of his career was a very solid, but maybe not the most spectacular player, but you see him have a breakout year in Minnesota with a very innovative scheme, and it was also a very good player for New England because they knew what they had there. And obviously, when you have a guy like that, the ideal thing you want to have is a leader, someone who has high football IQ, and this is something certainly that Jalen Walker has in spades. This is a guy who's a leader in the Georgia locker room, and Georgia, to be clear, have had one of the best defenses for the last 3-4 years, and he was the leader in that locker room, someone who was essential to building the entire scheme around and being so dominant as they were, especially in their heyday a couple of seasons ago. So this is a guy who can kind of do everything. He's a good as a blitzer, he can do a good enough job as a kind of pure pass rusher. He could be a linebacker up the middle if you needed to. He tackles well. He has decent coverage ability, his good coverage ability as well. So I think it's just a concern that if you went to a really boring defensive mind who's just like, oh, you're a 4-3 defensive end, or you're a you're a will linebacker, that won't get the most out of a Jalen Walker. But I think we have entered an era of the NFL where these tweener guys are getting used much more effectively, and so I think you can be very excited this guy will be maximized most likely in the NFL. So probably not the guy that will ever put up the kind of gaudy statistics that will make you go, oh, this guy deserved to be number one overall, but someone who will be kind of the essential cog, the essential base around which the rest of the defense can operate and work really effectively, which is what he did for Georgia. So, as I said, these kind of second level defensive players, these linebackers, these hybrid safety linebacker type guys, they're not as exciting as some other positions, but they are really valuable today in the NFL, given the kind of disguises have become so important to how NFL defenses are trying to win against the offensive schemes these days.
Yeah, and other names you might hear in round one would be maybe Jihad Campbell or Nick Amamori. But yeah, we'll kind of see the bread and butter draft, right? Bread and butter draft. This is
Campbell's the other one who's probably got good first round buzz, and I think he looks like a linebacker. He's got really high upside, but he perhaps just lacks the kind of classic linebacker instincts. He's not a guy that you want to put in day one and say be our like quarterback of the defense type guy, but he has all of the upside to be there in 2 or 3 years. So I think it's just, you want to find a role for him immediately. It's kind of almost a little bit like Jalen Walker. It's kind of a pass rusher / linebacker and kind of doing a lot of different things, but he could eventually, he has all the things there to eventually hopefully develop those instincts and those football IQ to then become that dominant inside linebacker that teams covet at the NFL.
Yeah. Then onto the back end of the defense, so your cornerbacks, your free safeties. So teams looking here be Minnesota, Green Bay, Jacksonville, Baltimore, San Francisco. But what's this? A spanner in the works? What about a cornerback / wide receiver, Ronan? Never heard of that before. Travis Hunter out of Colorado. We were going to talk about him in the wide receiver, but we put him in here. So I've heard some people going, well, this guy will play cornerback and then he'll be kind of like a break in case of emergency wide receiver. And then some people saying this guy will play wide receiver and be a break in case of emergency cornerback. And then I've heard 1 or 2 people being like, why not just play him both ways? Because all of his like ligaments and tendons will turn.
Travis Hunter
has come out and said that he wants to play both ways in the NFL. It's a bit of an ask for anyone's body to be able to do something like that. I would suggest that maybe it's not the best idea, and whoever drafts him is going to have to deal with that. The comp here is Champ Bailey, but yeah, like Unicorn 2A, cornerback wide receiver. He's incredibly athletic. He has great instincts. He has ball skills. He's catching skills. He's able to go up and get it. He has anticipation. I can see why you'd want to play him both ways because he's valuable both ways in slightly different directions. I think the main concern is going to be managing his expectations of being able to play both positions and, you know, managing workload and all that kind of stuff. It's quite a difficult act to do, particularly given this guy is probably going pretty high up. We have him going high up in both our mocks.
Poorly run organizations up there that I'd be concerned about.
Yeah, that might not be able to manage that. The other one would be as well, as a cornerback, look, he knows his roots, he's great hands, he's great to go for contested balls. He's not much of a tackler, which is not all that surprising really when you think about it. But
neither was Deion Sanders, and like that. I think that's it. Like this, like obviously we talked about Deion Sanders' actual son, who's obviously the quarterback for Colorado. But like Deion Sanders famously did some 2A stuff, though mostly a cornerback when he got to the NFL, and this guy is like, I want to make it happen. And like, you know, I want to be the Shohei Ohtani type player who makes 2A play happen in the NFL. And I think most scouts and most coaches and most GMs are like, that's impossible. But if there's one guy who loves football, drinks, eats and sleeps with football, who has the raw athleticism, who has the raw football IQ, who just absolutely jumps off the tape every time you see him, it is this guy, Travis Hunter. And like, this was perhaps at a lower level of the college game with Colorado not playing the SEC type Titans, but even given that, you know, this guy just looks different, and he's probably the only generational in a weird way, as it's kind of a unicorn way, because he's a 2A type player, but the guy who has all the upside in the world. The comps that this guy gets as both a cornerback and a receiver are ridiculous. Instead, like Champ Bailey, like a Hall of Fame type quarterback, OBJ, like, you know, a very great wide receiver, Garrett Wilson wide receiver, comps like that. This guy just has everything, and guys are getting excited. There's like fights between like the kind of defensive community and like the offensive community, and the fantasy community is annoyed because they're like, do we draft this guy? But he's not going to play wide receiver enough. And yeah, it's just really hard to imagine how do you make it the NFL, which is so complex as, you know, big men with chess, that's become like accommodate a guy like this who isn't going to have enough time to go to all of the wide receiver meetings and all the cornerback meetings. And basically in Colorado was a member of the cornerback move, but basically just was told, here's like 10 plays that you have as a wide receiver. But like, you know, he might go wide receivers where the money is, so maybe I want to go in that direction. So it's really, there's just a lot of moving pieces there, but there's no doubt that this guy is an elite special football player. And it's just like, as I said, trying to create a situation and enough respect within the organization that this guy just doesn't kind of wildly go off in his own direction. Like, he had obviously someone he almost inevitably respected in Deion Sanders, since he had some, obviously, you know, that's Deion Sanders, I'm Travis Hunter, we're you know, we're kin effectively. I think he's like I think he is related to Sanders, like as a cousin or something like that anyway. But like, that's a situation which you're not going to have when you're drafted by like a team probably in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, can you control this guy and create something elite there? But you're going to create something special. I think it's going to be really fun and interesting. So the fact that he's a really great cornerback, and he, unsurprisingly, he's the prototypical runs the routes for the wide receiver, because, he is literally a wide receiver, and he does show that on tape, and you just see plays where he just basically sees exactly what's happening and basically comes out of nowhere and picks off the play or makes a pass break up that basically you wouldn't see, other players do. And then you pair that with this high-end athleticism, with being like a freak of nature and stuff like that. And yeah, quarterbacks will definitely be concerned about him as well. And I think I think it's just, how do you make a room, because obviously coming from the Deion Sanders school, he's not exactly going to be a wilting
Quiet.
flower or anything like that. How do you create a situation to keep this guy happy, especially because you're probably going to a team that might be struggling initially in his career? That'll probably be the biggest challenge with this guy, because as long as I think he'll probably continue to be a cornerback, but if he starts like pushing to be a wide receiver for more money, whatever like that, that's the kind of like bad teams will make this a bad situation. But I can only see it just turning into like being him, like, a good player rather than a great player. But this guy has the potential to be a game breaking type player if he goes to the right situation, to the right coaching situation. So yeah, like I think the sky is the limit for this guy. It's just, you just have to worry about where he'll go more than anything else, just because he's such a unique,
And like I said,
unique profile.
I think the problem we have is he's going to go high, and a lot of those teams aren't great spots.
We will see in the mock draft who we think he's going to, and we probably aren't very happy about that.
Other players that might be called in first round, you have cornerback Will Johnson, quarterback / safety Shade Barron, Malachi Starks, and Maxwell Hairston as well. So there's a good few options at that level.
So I think the problem if you're looking for your prototypical like shutdown corner, you probably won't find too many of them here, but you will find guys who fit very well with the modern NFL. Like Will Johnson's he'd be great in zone, very opportunistic, kind of plays almost a thief role for Michigan, stuff like that. He looks long and smooth, so you kind of think he could be maybe more of a kind of rough and tumble guy. That's not really his game necessarily. He was injured last year, so had a bit of a turn off. So I think you see some interesting comps like JC Horn, but I've always seen some people compared to like Marcus Peters, who obviously played for Chiefs back in the day. He wants to make big plays, and he maybe takes a few too many risks to get there, and he might get burned at the next level. Jaddy Barron's kind of could play. He's kind of this guy who could play cross thing, almost kind of the modern nickelback, who's good enough to play outside, but is really almost at his best at the inside, where you can see the play and kind of get down to the ball and make plays there. And Malachi Starks is kind of again a kind of modern safety, could basically do everything, kind of play anywhere. Maybe some people think he's a little bit overhyped, but I think if you're just looking for someone who's plug and play in a modern like two safety type schemes you're seeing in the NFL, it would be I think a plus there at the very least. And Maxwell Hairston is probably the most kind of zone agnostic type prospect, but perhaps lacks the kind of elite traits that gets guys really excited, so he might fall into day two.
Yeah, and just to highlight two special teamers who might creep in, it's a kicker, Andreas Borgalis, 4-year kicker, who's 86% on his kicks and 75% over 50. So kind of be an interesting one. Might be someone who'd sneak in at the back end. And if you're looking for a punter, James Burnip.
I don't know if it's actually pronounced like rhyming with turnip, but I want
Burnip.
to rhyme with turnip.
Good, consistent punter, a lot of hang time, should be able to find himself a spot. If not drafted, he'll be picked up as a UDFA anyway, so that'll be fine. I think that brings us to the most important part, Ronan. This is our mock draft, where we can decide who really gets football. Given that none of us watch a huge amount of college, this is always great. Okay, so first up on the clock, I will say this year we haven't done any trades. I just noticed we don't have any trades in here.
Yeah, well, if the NFL isn't going to do any trades beforehand, then why would we do trades for them, basically?
Yeah. Right, we'll kick it off. We've also, Sean has put in a mock draft as well, so I'll let you know how he's going with them. Titans up first. We're all uniformly in agreement they're going to go for Cam Ward.
Yep, they basically don't have a quarterback right now. It's Will Levis, basically, and this is the only guy with quarterback one worthy traits. Yep. So
and
maybe a little bit rich, but if you're the best quarterback in the class and you're good, then you're going to go number one.
Yeah, next up is the Browns. I'm surprised we're all in agreement here, so we've decided they're going to take Travis Hunter.
Yeah, so I think early on in the process, people were putting Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter in here. I think the Abdul Carter with the injury issue and perhaps some of his issues in lacking power on tape came up, but I think it's probably going to be one of those two guys. Like, I think the idea of putting Abdul Carter alongside Myles Garrett makes a lot of sense, kind of as a Batman-Robin type situation. But I think as the draft process has gone on, Travis Hunter, the unicorn, the kind of genuine generational player narrative has built up, and some people have slotted him here at number 2. But yeah, it could be Abdul Carter either here.
Yeah, so obviously then we've got the Giants all going for Abdul Carter at 3, them being the best edge rusher available. It's not going to turn that team around, but as we said, they're building themselves to be a bit more entertaining to watch so the guys can keep their jobs. Abdul Carter fits that mold. It's not going to get anyone fired. It might help them on the defense.
I think this isn't the natural fit. Like, they've obviously invested a lot in the edge position with trades and stuff like that, and with draft picks in previous years with Brian Burns and such like that. Like, I think this is just genuinely like, this is the best elite, like everyone loves this player guy, so let's just draft him. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants maybe consider a trade down, or if they make a more surprising pick to kind of boost up their offense, because this is a make or break season for that GM head coach combo. So Abdul Carter just feels like a move of a more safer regime than this, but he is probably the third best player in the draft, so we've given him them. But I'd be less confident about this pick if this is where the draft is dropping at this point.
I would say if the Giants are there, I think the only problem would be that it might highlight the mistakes that they made in the front office. But like, if I was them, I'd be picking up Ashton Jeanty straight away. Just be like, right, let's put a proper good running back in here. Like we saw what happened with Saquon once he got out the door.
It depends how prideful you believe the GM is, because obviously that's basically admitting you made a mistake letting Saquon Barkley go.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's the only reason that I didn't put him in here. Is because I think they'd be like, I don't want to highlight that mistake I made.
We are, despite how badly we're going to do, trying to predict what will happen, not what we think should happen, just to be clear.
Yeah. Patriots, we're in agreement for the first 5 picks. This is mad. Patriots take Will Campbell, top offensive tackle option on the board. Makes sense. Get support for their young quarterback. Start to build themselves out a little bit. Also, it's kind of in line with like Vrabel will want to build that kind of stuff out. I was contemplating him going Janty as well, kind of just going with the let's literally build the Titans 2.0 here. But yeah,
I think they go BPA for their quarterback basically, because they're early on regime. They know they have their quarterback, so get the best weapon / tackle or offensive lineman available. If he turns into Zach Martin, you can basically live with that, because this is not a desperation scenario with as you say, Vrabel coming in with a lot of clout. So it's a bit of a boring pick, but I think it's the right one for New England. Build that offensive line around the quarterback, and if you have a good offensive line and you have a good quarterback, the skill position kind of work itself well enough to make that progress you need to see in year one of the Vrabel regime.
Yeah, and we have the Jags going defensive tackle with Mason Graham, obviously looking
This is very much Mason Graham's the last like elite player, unless the Jags do want to go for Ashton Jeanty, which I'd say wouldn't actually be a bad move for them.
But they have spent a lot of draft capital on running backs over the last 5 years.
I know, but like if they see Jeanty as being the blue chip talent and they want to zerp up that offense and kind of get Trevor Lawrence scoring, I could see it. But like Mason Graham, like I think he kind of fits more what they want to do. They have a very good defensive line, so Graham can be a complementary piece with all the other guys they've drafted highly there. But I'm not like, some people are really in on Mason Graham to Jag, so maybe there's something out in the air that we're not aware of, like for insiders and stuff. But I'm not a huge fan of the fit necessarily. It's not a bad fit, but it just doesn't get me too excited about the Jags.
Yeah, I think they want to put someone down there, help out Josh Allen a bit, and like they've never put a lot of time and free agency into this position. They haven't had the production they want out of it. Yeah. But yeah, now we start to diverge a little bit. Raiders at 6. Myself and yourself are in lockstep, Ronan. The Raiders do a very Raidersy thing. Take Ashton Jeanty.
And a very Pete Carroll thing as well.
I think it makes sense from a Pete Carroll perspective. I also think that like it's a Raidersy thing to be like, yeah, we're gonna take a running back like early in the first round. To hell with what you considered owners think. This is what we're going to do. But yeah, I think it meshes with the coach. I think it takes pressure off the quarterback room a little bit, will help Gino out. They don't have a ton of wide receivers, and I think this makes sense. Sean has them going quarterback and going Shedeur Sanders. Now they do have an out in the quarterback contract with Gino next year anyway for a relatively cheap price. So like they will be looking at succession planning. I'm just not sure about this one. I'm not sure that environment in Vegas is the best one for Shedeur Sanders, but who knows?
I like it as a vibes thing. Like I think the Sanders brand with Vegas feels good. That's obviously a very marketing heavy town. So I don't hate it, but I do think Ashton Jeanty, like the next great running back with Pete Carroll. You obviously have your quarterback situation sorted now. You have Brock Bowers as basically your best receiver. There probably are safer picks and maybe more long-term dynasty building type picks, but this is a regime here for a good time, not a long time. So get this exciting dynamic running back in and start making some explosive runs happen to get those Vegas tourists going wild.
Yeah, Jets at 7. We're in lockstep on this one. We have them going tackle Armand or
Yeah, like
Membu.
if Vegas are like here for a good time in a long time, the Jets are like, yeah, we tried to have a good time, but it didn't go very well. So let's like sober up and draft like the best defensive lineman available and start building around
Yeah,
whatever we happen to put together at the quarterback
this would
position.
this would just
Justin
be
Fields for now,
a
but
smart common
yeah.
sense pick, which is something the Jets haven't been doing for a while, but like I think it just tracks, doesn't it?
And Membu is like, obviously they've had some issues drafting tackles high in the past, but Membu is, based on everything we've seen, is a very safe pick. He just has good technique and good mechanics already, and he has the potential to be even better than that if he fills out his frame a bit, but already kind of a very solid option, so shouldn't be much risk here. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the Jets are like, we tried risk and we tried having fun. Let's rebuild something more foundational here that maybe could become a something that could become a more consistent challenger in the AFC going forward.
Panthers at 8. We're all lockstep here, taking Jalen Walker, the edge rusher. Look, obviously the Panthers have lost pass rushers in recent years and have then just paid over the odds for guys along that defensive line. Just this offseason, I think they look to expand this year, bring in Jalen Walker, and hope that he kind of fits well in with them. I think it's a decent fit, particularly at this spot and who's available.
Yeah, like I think their defense was a disaster last year. Now it was affected a lot by injuries, but I think bring in a guy like, I think this is a team that has a bit more rope to kind of has a year or two to kind of build itself up and kind of rebuild the franchise. Like there is maybe some idea of maybe building around the quarterback. Bryce Young kind of continued to make his life easier, but I think the defense was so bad and put him in such a bad position last year that they just need to get like talented guys. And Jalen Walker is a great chess piece who hopefully can make everyone else around him better with his leadership and kind of come to build into be the leader of that defense as much as anything else.
Yeah, Saints up next, as we talked about. There's problems with the cars not starting, so we have them going quarterback. For myself and yourself, we got Shador Sanders landing here. Obviously, we said it helps bums on seats, big promo. I think the Saints fit him quite well. Sean obviously has Shador already gone, so he has them taking a wide receiver, Terracotta McMillan, which is, look, not a bad shout. The only problem is currently they have no one who pass the ball to.
Yeah, like I think the Sanders pick is as much about the vibe as anything else. I think they need something that will keep the fans from tearing the whole place down effectively, and Sanders has the brand at least to get it going. And obviously, the Saints fans' best experience at quarterback was with Drew Brees, who Sanders has made some player comparisons with in terms of being a very efficient distributor of the ball rather than being like a big explosion type guy, or at least Drew Brees towards the end of his career. So like I can see the fit. I don't think it's a great pick for Sanders necessarily, and obviously rumors his father had some influence there, but I think the vibes be good, and obviously Mardi Gras and all that kind of stuff means that he should fit in and be a good marketing exercise than anything else. But I hope he succeeds and goes there, but I would be concerned because that team is such an absolute mess right now in terms of his cap situation.
Yeah, and I think, look, the Saints are gonna have to go quarterback. If it's not him, probably Jackson Dart or someone
Yeah,
like that. But
and
like,
there is a chance, like if he doesn't get drafted here, he could fall quite far down, and a Saints or another team might decide to trade back into the first round to pick him up towards the back end of the first round instead.
yeah, I think it's one of those ones where for the Saints with their cap hell and everything they're going through, I think they need to get a rookie quarterback so that they can use that rookie quarterback scale to try and right the ship over the next 4 years as well. The Bears are up next. Myself and yourself have them going tight end with Tyler Warren, who's obviously the top tight end in the group. Sean, who Alshon Jeanty is still on the board for him. The Bears pick up Alshon Jeanty. That'd be a great get for them if they could, but I don't see him getting that far down. I think Tyler Warren will help. They obviously want to help build some more support system around the quarterback and so on. So I think just a top end tight end is really helpful in that.
Yeah. And Tyler Warren's got a lot of comps to Sam Laporta, who obviously had a lot of success with Ben Johnson, who's now the Bears head coach. So I think, with Ben Johnson, this is not only a good pick in terms of I think it would be good for the Bears, but also probably maximizing the chance that Tyler Warren become the kind of do all fancy Taysom Hill bullshit type player that he was for Penn State. So I like this pick both in terms of vibes and also hopefully in terms of production. So yeah, decent chance this happens.
Very good. Next up, we have the 49ers. Strange turn of events. This also happens with the Packers later on. Even though we've diverged, we're now back on the same page. We've all got them going cornerback and we've all got them going Will Johnson.
Yeah, good schematic fit, very zone heavy guy, someone who could be a playmaker for them after they lost Javarius Ward due to unfortunate circumstances there. So I think in terms of fit and being a good player, he should work well within that scheme. So I think, he's a very good cornerback. The only issue is he has maybe he could get burnt if he's put into a bad situation or expected to be a man-to-man press type quarter. That won't happen in 49ers, so I think he'll be a good pick here if they did go that direction.
Yeah, next up, the Cowboys. This is our first chaos pick where we've all gone different directions. So John's decided to need edge rush help, and he gives them Michael Williams, top edge rusher on the board at the moment for him. You want them to go wide receiver, and you pick up Matthew Golden to obviously pair with CeeDee Lamb. And I say they're going to go running back. Obviously, the bringing Zeke back didn't work. They're quite threadbare, and they bring in Amari and Hampton to try and
But they
be the
picked up
engine.
Javonte Williams. That's totally going to fix things.
Yeah, Javonte Williams, that's fine. Yeah, look, the Cowboys have a lot of bits they need, and they're also highly tight to the cap with what they're paying kind of the top of the roster, so they're going to need to flesh out all these positions anyway, so any of these would make sense to me.
Yeah, and we've basically now entered the kind of messy part of the draft, because you said there's this big clump. There's kind of maybe top 10, 12 type players, and after that it's a lot of guys who could be anywhere between a round 1 to round 2 grade depending on the team and scheme fit and stuff like that. And yeah, for the Cowboys, they have so many needs right now, and depends, do you think they need to focus on the offense and getting Dak Prescott back up to skill, or they need to kind of get that defense firmed up? They could go in so many different directions, so yeah, I think any of these picks would make sense for them at this point.
Yeah.
And similarly for the Dolphins, like, they're obviously a team that's in a really weird situation. I think Jalen Ramsey is now officially on the trade block. Tyreek Hill is on and off the trade block, according to him, basically every second week. And obviously they've built a certain team. It's never got over the hump. And they're similarly have now the Terran Armstead retired and stuff like that. So they feel like they need skill position. They feel like they need offensive linemen. They feel like their defense could definitely do it, taking a step or two up as well. So I think, you went for Matthew Golden. I went for Ted McMillan, both wide receivers. Sean went for the more safe option of Kelvin Banks, a good tackle prospect there. But they feel like, I don't know. I don't have great vibes around the Miami Dolphins right now, to be frank. But the boring pick from Sean is probably the better pick objectively. But I could just see him doing the exciting thing, because I think that's a fan base who wants to be kept excited for whatever reason.
And I think given the up in the air nature of the wide receivers, the injury stuff that's been happening is why I'm kind of leaning wide receiver on them.
And going to maybe a more boring kind of pass the ball 100 times guy, rather than like big play Tyreek Hill, which he's done less of in the last year or two, where he's become more of a possession guy. Getting a Ted McMillan, which is my pick, might make sense for them, just to get that kind of Michael Pittman type maybe initially complimentary, but eventually the centerpiece of your offense, rather than relying on these kind of big play merchants.
Next up is the Colts. I have them going tight end with Colston Loveland. You've got them going offensive tackle with Kelvin Banks, and Sean has them going tight end with Tyler Warren. So yeah, look, we're kind of, it's a spot where the Colts don't really know where they are. I think they're kind of leaving we have our quarterback sorted area, but I think all of us have gone in the direction of, well, let's give them the means to at least try it out this year. Or if they go to, Danny Dimes is there now as well as the backup, isn't he? So like, either get an offensive tackle who can help keep them upright, or give them a tight end who will provide them with like kind of short mid-range exit points on routes and so on.
Like, they are very lacking at tight end, but I kind of feel like Michael Pittman basically fulfills much of what a tight end can do in that offense, in terms of being kind of the safety blanket for whoever the quarterback is, whether it be Richardson or Donnie Dimes, whatever like that. So I went for the tackle, because they did lose a number of offensive linemen this offseason, though mostly from the interior, to be fair. So like, I can see tight end, because you like build weapons around your, the quarterback who has one last shot to be, live up to his draft reputation. But yeah, Colts, another team in this kind of midsection who vibes aren't great, let's be frank.
Falcons up next. Myself and Sean have gone for a cornerback for them in Jade Barron. You've gone for an edge rusher in Michael Williams. This is a team whose defense need a bit of work following last year. We're still kind of up in the air, presuming that it is going to be, the rookie quarterback and so on. They do have weapons on an offensive side. They need to build out the defensive side.
Yeah, I've gone for the edge rusher, because the Falcons have, notoriously not had good edge rush for many, many years. And I think, they'll, I think the defensive coordinator and the head coach are both from the Rams. So they might go what Jared Verse did last year. So go for the big, powerful pass rusher like Michael Williams or Shamar Stewart, and get that guy going, because it's much easier to teach a power guy to become a reasonably good finesse guy, or, other types of pass rush type move guy, than vice versa. But, I think their defensive, like their entire defense needs work over. So Jade Barron is a perfectly reasonable pick as well. So anywhere on the defense, best defensive player available might be the pick here for the Falcons.
Yeah, for the Cardinals, we've definitely got this wrong, so we're all in agreement at 16 that they're taking Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher. I think edge makes sense for them. They do need that, but the fact that we've all agreed makes me sure this is wrong.
Yeah, like we're basically in this kind of cluster of those kind of high potential edge rushers, like with Michael Williams and Shamar Stewart, and there's other like interior defensive linemen as well. So I think it's just like whatever. If you like, I think Cardinals have such a bad defensive lineman, but I don't think they're quite on the fast track. We need to be really good right now. Going for these raw options like Williams or Stewart might make sense for them, but they can also do some beef up the middle for these guys like Walter Nolan or other guys might also be in play here for the Cardinals. But I would be very surprised if the Cardinals aren't picking a lot of defensive linemen high up in this draft because they are really bad there right now.
Bengals are up next. Myself and Sean are in agreement on going for Mike Green off the edge. We've gone inside interior defensive lineman Walter Nolan. Look, the defense needs bodies. All the money is being spent on offense. It was terrible last year. They're almost certainly losing Trey Hendrickson. Like this is they need to just get best defensive line available.
Yeah, like it's very hard to tell with the Bengals. They changed their DC this offseason. Obviously, there's a big uncertainty around Trey Hendrickson, whether they're going to kind of hold on to him and make him play no matter what. But yeah, I do think this is a defense that was really bad last offseason. They obviously paid all the money to make the offense fun and exciting. That they probably could still work on their offensive line, to be honest. But it definitely feels like this is a meat and potatoes draft for the Bengals where they need to start hitting on these trench players. Yeah, well, whatever direction you go, whether by Mike Green or Walter Nolan, they need to start hitting because they really have had some bad picks here in the last few years.
Yeah, Seahawks up next. Myself and yourself have the same direction, just different players. Interior offensive line. I went Tyler Booker. You went Gray Zabel. Sean saw the exodus of wide receivers in the offseason, so they need an extra one, and he's given them Matthew Golden, which I can see the argument for, but just one of the recurring things we keep coming to, Ronan, is the offensive line play, and then particularly given who your quarterback now is, making sure that the line holds up and doesn't start seeing ghosts.
Yeah, like they have one good lineman, and it's Charles Cross. All the other linemen, there's question marks over them, especially in the interior. That was really bad last year. This is a team that wants to run the ball, so I think they'll find the meanest road grader that they can find, and I think Tyler Booker and Gray Zabel both fit that. I've given Gray Zabel a slight advantage because he has more intangibles in terms of being a leadership type guy, but also he has like he has position flexibility, which is valuable for the Seahawks right now because they're basically gonna have to build their line from scratch at the moment. So a guy who can fit in a tackle in an emergency or the interior or a center is something that can be very valuable while they kind of figure this out over the next season or two. But yeah, Golden in to make it more exciting. I could see the play, but I'd be surprised if the Seahawks went in the receiver direction and not interior offensive line. They have a lot of top 100 picks, so they might get the offensive lineman later on because there is good depth there, but yeah, I could see them going there early and often starting here.
No, of course. But the thing is, I'd say the same about wide receiver, that like maybe Golden is a step above, but like there's a lot of like, your WR2s.
They have JSN, and they obviously signed Cooper Kupp, so I think for a run first offense, it's not ideal to be just with those two guys, your top guys. But I think it's enough for them to feel like they don't.
But that's it. I think a third round pick would be fine to add into that mix, and then kind of see if they can develop their way up and so on. Buccaneers up next. Again, we've definitely got this wrong because we've all agreed that it's going to be Jihad Campbell going to them, the safety linebacker combo.
Yeah, I get the vision right and why we've gone for him. They basically go, Levante David's been there forever. He's obviously towards the end of his career. Get this guy under Levante David and become the next great inside linebacker for the Bucs. I think given that he's quite raw in terms of his instincts and kind of being like a true natural inside linebacker, I think some people have some doubts about that. This is a guy who could also go much higher because of his upside and potential. But I could see the story here, and we've decided to go with the story and say this guy's new Levante David basically. So it's a fine enough pick, I think.
Yeah, we have Broncos going offense across the board from us. So I have them going wide receiver because Tep McMillan has fallen, and they're going to say, well, why not add him into the mix? You've gone running back with Amarian Hampton, who I have off my board already, and Sean has gone Colston Loveland, the tight end, who I've also got off my board already. So I think we're all going in the direction of their line held up pretty good. They'd like a few more weapons for the young fella, and their defense is doing all right. So I would expect to see an offensive player here.
They just need a bit more solid juice, which I don't know if that fits together, but basically they need reliable but also exciting.
How can one be a liquid and a solid simultaneously?
Yeah, it's Bose-Einstein condensate, whatever. Like this is definitely a situation where I think they obviously built last season something good and solid. Let's get a bit more excitement in there so the fans can get fully into this project going forward. Like Cortland Sutton is fine as your first receiver, but you don't want that to be the future of the team from the fans' perspective.
No. Steelers are up next. Myself and yourself are locked in on what we think's happening. So Sean thinks they're going to build up the defense. Derek Harmon. There is probably need to start adding some pieces in there. While they're still good on defense, they are actually aging out in a few of these spots a little bit. So there will be needs there. But I would say that myself and yourself are more on the right path here, Ronan, where this is a team who's been floundering since Big Ben left. They don't have an answer at quarterback. They've tried loads of things. I think they take a quarterback. I think they're still going to pick up an older free agent and have them start the season, but I think they're going to take their quarterback of the future, or at least try to. I've got them going Jackson Dart. You've got them going Jalen Milrow.
Yeah, I think just a big question is whether they'd want to do it here or they're willing to risk maybe trying to trade up like into even maybe into the bottom of the first round or into early the second round or whatever they want to do. I think both this is a bit rich for probably both these guys in terms of like value. And the Steelers are generally kind of safe team. But I think they will definitely draft a quarterback, whether it's at 21, we'll see. But it could definitely be either of these guys either here or later on. So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go there.
Given their position here, and if they think that they're safe, and looking at teams behind them, you'd say largely would expect to be so. This might be a spot for someone like the Chiefs to move up into and try and get ahead of a couple of teams who might be interested in offensive tackles. Chargers are up next. We've got them going in a couple of different directions here. So the Chargers are still kind of mid-rebuild, still trying to put a stamp on exactly what they want this team to look like. I've got them going defensive tackle with Kenneth Grant. You've got them going tight end with Colston Loveland. And Sean has them adding edge rusher James Pierce Jr.
Yeah, like this is a trenches focused team, right? So going for a defensive lineman or perhaps potentially even interior offensive lineman might make sense to them. But I think defense continues to be the focus here. Make this defense into a fearsome unit to create those kind of close, tight games that they want with Harbaugh. I really going for Colston Loveland. It was one of my kind of cheat players. I kind of just moved them lower down than they probably will end up going in the draft. I think they will get drafted higher. Maybe the Chargers draft trade up for him. But he did play for Michigan, and I think he basically was in love with Harbaugh, and Harbaugh was in love with him. So if the Chargers could trade up to get this guy if he fell into the middle of the draft, but probably won't fall to 22. But if he did fall to 22, I think they'll run up with the pick for Colston Loveland.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because I think he's gone on both myself and Sean's drafts at this point. Packers up next. I have them going offensive tackle with Kelvin Banks. You have them going cornerback with Jade Barron. And Sean has them going edge rusher with Donovan Izaraku. I would say you might be right here, Ronan, the cornerback, particularly given that they are actively shopping one of their cornerbacks.
Yeah, I think defensive back is something that they could focus in on, but they're not in a terrible position there, even if they do trade away Jair Alexander. But they do feel just like a BPA team because they have like good players and lots of young players at nearly every position, and it's really just I could just see them go whoever's left at this point, which we don't know obviously right now. But yeah, Jade Barron would be a higher drafted player who dropped. Kelvin Banks is a guy who gone higher in both my and Sean's board, so if he was there, why not take him and make that offensive line even stronger? And Donovan Izaraku is a interesting edge rusher, more of a finesse guy, a guy who had good production but lacks elite traits. I think they're a team that prefers to kind of have guys who are productive and reliable rather than going for the high upside, high risk type pick. So that would make sense as well. But yeah, I think it's almost impossible to predict this pick. It'll basically depend where the board's falling.
And I would say that pick of Calvin Banks, some of that is also just that he's fallen. Not dissimilar to what you were saying about Colston Loveland. It might not be the Packers making that pick. It might be someone shifting up to do it. But yeah. Vikings up next. My God, we're definitely wrong on this one. Like, there's no way that we're all uniformly in agreement on the 24th overall pick.
Like, the process is fine because Maliki Starks is a guy who seems to be falling down boards over the course of the draft process. He fits a hole that they missed with Cameron Bynum leaving during the offseason. He's a flexible safety option, which seems to fit well between the Florida State defense and as a leader within that Georgia defense. So all the things say that it would be a reasonable pick, but given the chaos at the point you get to 24, whether it actually happens or not is a completely different thing. But I think even the consensus draft has come down to Maliki Starks being the pick here, but it definitely feels like all the other holes are filled, and it's like, yeah, Maliki Starks makes sense there. Why not just put him in there? And it makes enough sense to make sense narratively, if nothing else.
Yeah, we've got Texans up next, and what do you know? We're not exactly in agreement because we have slightly different players available, but yeah, we've got them all going offensive line.
It's best OL. If they're not going best OL, like I don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, they not only have a desperate need at offensive line, but they also traded away probably their best offensive lineman. So yeah, this has definitely got to be offensive lineman. I have Josh Cornerly. You and Sean have Josh Simmons. We've got the Rams up next.
Another team like the Packers where it's very difficult to predict them. You have to go into safety, Emin Wari. I've been going a DB with Hurston, Gabuka on the offense. I don't think that's good. I think after signing Devante Adams, I'd be surprised with that. But, I think the only thing you'll find is that you'll probably be slightly surprised by their pick, and it will probably just work out because, the Rams trade away their first rounds for years, and then they come back last year and have some first rounders, and they immediately hit. So, yeah, I would imagine that they'll pick about BPA, whoever that happens to be at this point, basically.
Yeah, no, it would make sense. They're a particularly hard team to pick. We've gone Ravens next. Myself and yourself have them going defensive tackle. I've gone Walter Nolan. You've got Kenneth Grant, and Sean has them going offensive side of the ball with offensive tackle Josh Cornelly Jr.
Yeah, this is a meaty draft, I think, for the Ravens, and they will. I don't know if they'll draft a defensive lineman in the first round, but they will be. I think they'll be stocking up on their interior defensive linemen and interior offensive linemen throughout the first 3 days, the first 2 days of this draft and into day 3. But I think they could get started early with these Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant's a big guy, and they just lost Michael Pierce, but maybe you can get a better, better value nose tackle type prospect later on and go for the kind of higher upside Walter Nolan pick here. It might make a lot of sense for them. But
Yeah,
I think they're going meat, whether that be offensive meat or defensive meat, I don't know. But big guys
big
on the
boys.
Ravens menu, this
Yeah.
year I'd say. And I think similar for the Lions. I think they have the big guys on the offense already, but I'd be surprised if they aren't adding some meat, whether that be more slender meat on the edge or some big meat up the middle. I do think their defensive line adding some help there for Hutch
Well,
will
I
probably
would
be a
agree.
priority for them.
Sean has them
Um,
going offensive line, but I think
they,
they've got enough there that could be a day 2 look
yeah,
really for them. I
yeah.
think what we saw last year was, man, when we're missing Hutchinson, we did okay, but we could definitely do with some more guys there. And I think
Ah,
be that tackle, be that edge, it's
ah.
gotta be in that kind of area.
And they're going to draft a high character guy, like someone who likes breaking down doors and stuff like that. So, uh,
Yeah.
it's got to be someone who loves football basically, because they ain't going to the Lions otherwise.
Commanders up next. I've gone edge rusher Michael Williams. You've gone running back Trayvon Henderson, and Sean's gone Luther Bird Buden, the wide receiver. I think all of these are very viable picks. I
Yeah,
kind of like your one. I like the idea of like popping a proper running back in behind that offense and seeing what
yeah. I
happens.
think he would basically over the course of the season probably replace Austin Eckler within that offense and become obviously a younger, better option there. So I don't know if they need to do it this early to make that happen, but I think having an exciting element there, and they have so few genuine needs now after making some trades and moves in the free agency period.
Mm.
It's very hard to go here. Michael Williams, if he fell this far, they'd be like, well, the value's there, why not take it? So I could definitely see them be a team just goes BPA rather than trying to fix a hole. But Trayvon Henderson, I think, makes sense as the Austin Eckler replacement and kind of give him maybe some experience under Eckler to kind of get off on the right foot, basically. But
Yeah.
a wide receiver, the complement they have there might make sense, but after trading for Debo, I'd be maybe less likely at this point.
Bills are up next. I've got them going cornerback with Maxwell Hairston. You've got them going Trey Amos at cornerback, and Sean's got them going defensive line with Kenneth Grant. Again, look, this is just a need for this team. They have a lot of superstars on offense. The offense seems to be working pretty well at the moment. Maybe they look in day 2 at maybe bolstering that offensive line a little bit, but I think what we saw last year was they need some more playmakers on defense. We saw what happened with injuries to them over the last 2 or 3 seasons with cornerbacks going down, with linemen going down, and so on. It's just they need to get some more people in there, and particularly with the money that's going to Josh and the rest of the offense, they need to be building this through the draft. So I think it's going to have to be defense. And just the way my board fell, I like the cornerbacks that have fallen to them more so than the defensive linemen.
Playmakers is exactly the right word because they have lots of good players, lots of 7 out of 10 type players on the defense and on the offense, to be honest, as well. But I do think they just need to start adding like those game changer type guys who will turn pressure into turnovers and stuff like that, whether that be on the line or into the secondary. So I think Hurston is a good option, Amos is a good option, and I think once again they might probably go for BPA if the value's there, defensive line, take it. But if it's their DB, take it there as well.
Yeah. Chiefs up next. Myself and yourself have them going offensive tackle. I've gone Josh Simmons. You've gone Josh Cornelly. Sean has gone Walter Nolan defensive line here. Look, tackle's an issue for them. Josh Simmons fits the prototypical mold of what you're looking for. Will need time to develop. They've signed a left tackle to play for this season on kind of a short 2-year deal that has an exit point after 1 year. So if Josh Simmons was to fall here, I think they would have him in a heartbeat. But and they'd also have the time to kind of let him rest up, trade up, muscle up kind of thing, But
Yeah,
Josh Cornley
but
would
like
make sense as well.
that they need offensive line help, and there's so few genuine like good tackle prospects in this draft that if they want to tackle prospect, they'll probably have to take it here, or even say trade up to get it. So,
Oh, 100%.
Josh Simmons, Connolly, he's probably maybe a little bit rich to be here, but he's probably the last of a few like genuine, like proper tackle type guys you can get.
I do like Sean's pick of Walter Nolan. I think defensive line is a spot that we could do with adding some pieces to. I think the Chris Jones contract this is probably his last year. I would say they're going to try and trade him at some point.
Nolan's a high upside type guy, so that kind of fits with the Chiefs as well. But I think tackle just stands out so much that we feel almost obligated to pick for them.
I think the only thing that will stop this is if there's a bit of a run on tackles beforehand, and they have everyone who's here is the same grade as the guys who they'd have in the second round, and then they might look at some other bits, some succession planning and so on. But yeah, I think if the likes of Quarterly or Simmons is here, I think they just pull the trigger and try and get it done. Eagles last, I have them going defensive tackle in Derek Harmon. You have them going interior offensive line in Tyler Booker, and Sean's got them picking of Donovan Jackson for the interior offensive line.
If some Georgia defender falls as far, they'll almost inevitably draft them here. But they're a BPA type team, but they are a team that loves the trenches. So if there's good trench options available, whether that be offense or defense, I can see them going that direction.
That's where we are. I think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how we do. We agree on what, 11 picks?
11 we all agree, 6 where 2 out of 3 of us agree, and 15 where we all disagree. And like every year, we feed them into the consensus machine, which this year will be Titans get Cam Ward, Browns get Travis Hunter, Giants get Abdul Carter, Patriots get Will Campbell, Jags get Mason Graham, Raiders get Jeanty, Jets get Membu, Panthers get Walker, Saints get Sanders, Bears get Warren, 49ers get Johnson, Cowboys get Michael Williams, Dolphins get Ted McMillan, Colts get Loveland, Falcons get Barron, Cardinals get Shamar Stewart, Bengals get Mike Green, Seahawks get Gray Zabel, Buccaneers get Jihad Campbell, Broncos get Marion Hampton, Steelers get Jackson Dart, Chargers get Kenneth Grant, Kevin Banks to the Packers, Malachi Starks to the Vikings, Josh Simmons to the Texans, Nick Inwamawari to the Rams, Walter Nolan to the Ravens, Donovan Eziguruku to the Lions, Luther Burden to the Commanders, Maxwell Hairston to the Bills, Josh Connolly to the Chiefs, and Derek Harmon to the Eagles. A couple of guys who, because of the way the machine works, dropped out: Matthew Golden, Tyler Booker, James Pierce Jr. But the consensus machine, I think, has won the last couple of years, so let's see if it can keep up its reputation of the wisdom of the crowds. Not a particularly smart crowd, but still better than either of us individually.
Very good. Very good. So that'll probably take us now for a break for a little bit between now and the next episode, because obviously we'll be coming back in the summer with our preview series and all that kind of stuff. It'll be very exciting. Yeah. Any plans for the next few months? I'm going to be coming down to visit yourself and Sean in Cork. Yeah,
of course. We'll try to give you a good Cork welcome and stuff like that. We're coming to a busy period. Hoping to get a release out by the end of May. So get lots of testing between now and then. But other than that, nothing too exciting. I do apparently need to see Sinners though, because it's getting a lot of hype right now. So need to get myself to the cinema over the next
I really want to see that one as well, actually. For now, I suppose that's bye from myself. It's bye from Ronan. It's been all 4 quarters. Thanks for listening. We'll chat to you.